Good morning, or at least this morning here. Today I'm working on my 1998 Toyota Camry. I just bought it this last week and it has a really strong smell of gasoline. And from the videos I watched before I bought it, I know there's an evap canister and stuff, and sometimes those have problems, but I think mine's a little different problem. Let me show you what I have. So this is the car. If you own one, you know what they look like. I'm sure it's similar on several years. I already took this cover that goes here off, and there's two bolts that go right here that hold it in, and they have a little bit of an Allen wrench that holds them in. I'll show it to you real quick just so you know what it looks like. Now mine's a V6. I suppose it's kind of similar on the 4-cylinder, but I'm not 100% positive. But it's got these two Allen wrenches here. Let me see if I put that in my pocket. Nope. I'm not sure what size they are, sorry. I don't have it with me, it's around here someplace. Actually, here it is. I forgot, it's in my drill. What I did is I used my drill. This is the Allen wrench. Let's see if I can read the size here for you. I don't have my glasses on, and it probably wouldn't help if I did. I'm sorry, I don't know what size it is, but this thing, before I just put this in my drill and it wanted to fall out, so I got this holder that's magnetic, holds it in there. So that, you take that cover off, and then you just have to kind of pull up on it. It snaps into place. Now I got a flashlight out early this morning, and I came out here. As you can see, I've got a few things disconnected. I got the flashlight and I looked down in these holes here where I could see, and I noticed yesterday I looked down there and it was wet. I took a napkin to put down in there and it soaked it right up, and I smelled it was gasoline. So I knew I was having a leak here someplace. So this morning I came out and I turned the key on and I didn't see anything. But as soon as I started it, I could see it was getting wet down here. And it looks like these two fuel injectors, there's three on the front here, 1, 2, 3. I could see gas flowing out of them. Now these things have an O-ring on the top and on the bottom. So I'm assuming that the top O-ring is leaking. I could be wrong. Maybe the fuel injector itself is leaking. So I decided, well, before I go buy parts, I'm going to pull out the fuel injectors and see if I can figure out what it is. Now, here's what I've done so far. I had a 14 millimeter and I broke this bolt loose, and it was pretty tight. So I put the wrench on there, and then I used another wrench and I got on here like this for extra leverage and cracked it loose. So that relieved the pressure on the fuel rail. So I guess I may end up having to probably take that bolt completely out to get this fuel rail out. So this is the fuel rail. I've never worked on fuel systems like this. I've done a lot of stuff like spark plugs, other kinds of things, shocks, timing belts on different vehicles. So I watched a few videos and I finally found one that was pretty helpful. So I took a pair of pliers and I squeezed on the top of this connector here. This one I was able to get free with my fingers, but these in here there's no room for your hand. But what you have to do is squeeze this tab right here, and that releases it, and you just kind of gently wiggle it up, and that'll get your connector off the fuel injector. I did that. I got all three of those loose, and then there's another connector, electrical connector right here. I squeeze that with my finger. You can see the tab right there. I squeeze that, got that off of there. I'm going to go ahead and take this bolt out That'll free up this gas line that's feeding the fuel rail. Now I think, if I remember right from the videos I watched, there might be two of them. One of them is a return line because the extra fuel that doesn't get used goes back to your gas tank. So I've got to figure that one out for sure. And this little black harness here, that feeds these 3 spark plug wires. So, our coil wires, I guess they are. So from my understanding, you've got 3 coils and they're firing 2 spark plugs at the same time. So when this one is firing, this one is firing, that goes to the back. And maybe it fires the one on the opposite side. But what happens is, I guess to save money, I'm not sure. Instead of putting 6 coils on, they just put 3, and each one feeds 2 spark plugs, one in the front, one in the back. And I don't think I've got to take this off because I think I can fit the fuel rail right up beside it. Now, there is a bolt, a couple bolts, if I can find the studs, I guess. There's one right here, and there's one over here. And when I get those off, they look like they might be 10 millimeters. I'm hoping maybe the fuel rail will just pick up. And when it does, your fuel injectors will come out, hopefully. And then I can take a look at them. So let me get that done, and then we'll catch up. Okay, so I got this bolt out. It's gonna leak some gas, so do yourself a favor, put a paper towel or something under there to catch it. It'll evaporate, but still, I could have done that to save a mess. This is the bolt. As you can see, it's got a hole in it to let the fuel through. It's 14 millimeters. The way I got it out, I used my Chemo 90 degree 3/8 socket electric. And I had to put an extension on it, 6-inch extension, because this pipe is right in the way. So I came at it from down here. Once I got it loose and backed it out of there. Now, these are 10 millimeter nuts that go on the studs that hold the fuel rail down. They're right there. And the first one I took off, which is right there, it happened to come out of the socket, fell down in there. So I went and got my magnet. I'll show that to you here. I had 2 of these, a bigger one and this one. And I managed to lose the other one. I'm sure it's in a car someplace I worked on. But this is telescopic. So obviously you can make it longer and shorter. Comes in really handy when you drop bolts and nuts and screws. So I used that, fished it out of there. The other one fell off right down here, and I pulled it out of there. Now, this should, according to everything I've seen, yeah, it's loose now. So, that's not the fuel rail though. Alright, there might still be something else holding the fuel rail in there. This is just the vacuum tubes and electronic connectors. So let me see what else I need to do to get that fuel rail loose. Sorry, this is the first time I've done this, so I really don't know what I'm doing. I don't know, maybe I should have just mounted my camera and had you guys watch me do everything, but I went ahead and unclipped the coils from the wiring harness so I could get it out of the way. And those you push on this tab and they pull toward the back of the engine. The front ones are different. They're kind of the opposite. They have a little clip on the bottom and you have to push it out. So I used a small screwdriver, and then those pop up off of the coils. There's a vacuum line right here. You see that I took off the connectors, and then there's another small one, this one, that goes to the side of this, whatever it is, right there. connects there. I took that off so that way I could get this up out of the way. Now I've got to get that fuel rail to pull up out of there, and hoping with everything out of the way, let's take a different angle here. Okay, so now I've got, looks like maybe a couple 10mm bolts, one there, one there. I'll take those out, and then the fuel rail I think will come out. Now I'm just hoping that it's just a couple O-rings at the top. I'll replace the bottom ones and the top ones. Hope that fixes it. Otherwise I'm going to have to get new fuel injectors if these are cracked and leaking. What else did I do? I took this wiring harness out of the way. It had a bolt that went in right here that goes here, and then there was a little clip. Where did it go? This is the clip I'm talking about, and I squeezed it and it popped up off of something on here, I think. Yeah, something in there. Anyway, these look like they're broke. I don't know if they're supposed to look like that, but they look like they should be round circles for a bolt, but they're broke. Anyway, I'll get a 10mm. I'll get those two bolts out, and then I think I can pull the fuel rail with the fuel injectors off. Let's go there. Okay, I got the two bolts out. They are 10mm. They're about 2 inches long. They have a washer, but it doesn't look like the washer can fall off because of the threads, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, hopefully, let's see if I can do this while you guys are watching. I'm hoping I can just wiggle. Oh, well, it looks like I'm going to have a combination of 2 fuel injectors coming off and one stayed in the hole. And I'm assuming they're leaking from that hole right there. There's the O-ring on the top there, so I'm going to run down to Napa or Riley's. They both have them in stock. And now, one guy said he had a hard time finding them because they're not called O-rings, they're called dampeners, I think. But I know at the bottom, let's see if we can get you guys in focus somehow. There's an O-ring there, and there should be one at the top. So let's get this other fuel injector out of there. Yeah, well, I can see right now that thing is split. Can you guys see that? Will it focus? There. You can see that one split, and that's probably why they're leaking. But I'm going to go ahead and replace these O-rings, and I'm going to check these other ones because I don't think they're supposed to be split like that. They're probably brittle and just cracked. Maybe that's part of the reason why they're leaking. Not sure, but I'm sure if I replace, maybe that's the dampener part. I'll get these others out of here. Maybe I can do it while you guys are watching. They should come out fairly easily, I would think. There we go. Yeah, that one's not cracked. Doesn't appear to be. It's probably hard for you guys to see, but the O-ring looks a little rough. I'm sure it's dried out. This car is 25 years old, and I'm sure those top O-rings are probably leaking. Now, I've never looked at the bottom of a fuel injector in my life. There it is. Those look pretty clean. That one does. That one looks pretty clean. It looks scratched up like somebody cleaned it. Maybe that's why they're leaking. Somebody scraped them up to clean them. And okay, come on out of there. Let me set this down for a second. Yeah, it probably won't focus good enough. I'm going to try to get in someplace where maybe it will. If you guys can see that O-ring's pretty rough. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to get the O-rings for that and that. They almost look like they're the same. The spacers, I know that one is cracked, but I think it just takes up space so you can't jam the top on too far. I'll take some parts cleaner, spray these down a little bit to clean them up. Now one thing, let's see if I can keep these in the same order. That might help, I don't know. There. One guy, his engine was pretty dirty, so he took a vacuum and cleaned down in here to make sure none of that junk fell down inside the engine. Mine's pretty clean. So there's a spacer. Oh, okay, so here's the other spacer. Something you got to be careful of, that little black spacer right there. They're just sitting there. So when you put the fuel oil back on, make sure you got them there. Otherwise, you're gonna have problems. Now, one of the videos I watched, he was fixing somebody else's cobble job, and one of those spacers was missing. But where am I here? If I can, one of those spacers was missing, so the fuel oil wasn't sitting properly. It was leaking like a sieve. So that's where the bolt goes down through. Make sure those are where they belong. Make sure you don't have a bunch of junk around where your fuel injectors go in. Now, a secret to putting the O-rings on and in: either get a little bit of gasoline, which I have, and put the O-rings in there, and then dip the fuel injector in there, just the end of it where the O-ring is, be the bottom part. Inject that, slip that in the gasoline, and it gets it wet and lubricates it enough you can slip it back into the motor. Now this one's drying out, and that O-ring looks pretty rough. So it's all, you look at the difference between, I'm sorry, this is hard to focus. Look at the difference between that O-ring and that O-ring. I can see why they're leaking. They're like corroded and probably dried out. They probably don't even fill the space anymore. Something else, I was working on my truck the other day, and it's a 2006, and this magnet, extending magnet that I have, I dropped it, and of course it went down and got caught on the skid plate underneath, which is there. I just didn't feel like messing with it at the time, but I needed it today, so I knew it was down there. I saw it, so I got a socket and wrenches, and I took the skid plate off so I could get to the magnetic telescoping magnet. Side story. It's always something when you're working on cars. Now I'm going to go get these O-rings, and I'm going to get them put on. I'll show you that. I've got to do this today because I made the mistake of doing something like this. Only it was a transmission, and I had to wait a week for parts, and I'm telling you what, a week later it was really hard to remember where everything went. The hoses, in case of that transmission on that car right there, trying to remember how everything was hooked back up, it was just a pain in the butt. So I try to do everything the same day so I don't have to try to remember a week later what happened. So I'll shut this off. I'll go get the parts I need from O'Reilly's. It's the closest, and it's probably the same thing Napa has, I assume. They charge... Sorry, I get a cough once in a while since I had COVID a year ago, and it just about stops me in my tracks until I quit coughing. But they sell these, there's like 4 O-rings in each packet. So there's enough to do 2... So I suppose if you had a 4-cylinder, you'd buy 2 packets. You'd have enough to do all 4 fuel injectors. In my case, the other 3 are on the back of the motor, and I'm not going to mess with them today. I'm hoping this fixes my fuel smell problem. If it doesn't, I'm going to hire somebody to take the intake manifold off, all that stuff, and go in from the back side and do the same thing I'm doing today, because I just don't want to mess with it. It's too much work. I'll pause this here. I'll go get the parts, and then, of course, through the magic of editing, I'll pick up where I left off. Well, I made it back. This is my fuel injector, and these are the O-rings that they gave me, Velcro. And I thought when I looked at this, the top and the bottom O-rings were the same, and they might be, but they sure look a lot different than those. I think maybe they're just flattened out. That's what I'm hoping. If you can tell the difference there. The old one is thicker up and down. The other one's of course, are more round. But I'm just hoping it's age and that they'll work. It just doesn't quite look like it's the same O-ring as for the bottom. Let's see. Yeah. So I might leave the bottom ones alone because it's leaking from the top. See if that fixes my leak, because that's what I'm concerned about. It's almost $20 a kit if you want to rebuild the whole thing, and that would include this part, probably that dampener, this part, the O-rings. It's like everything. So I'm just going to spray this with some brake cleaner, clean it up good. I'm going to replace the top O-ring and see if that slips in the fuel rail all right. So give me a minute. Well, I got the O-rings on the tops of the injectors. I didn't replace the bottom because it's the top that's leaking, and I just wasn't sure if these were the right ones. They said they were supposed to be for the bottoms, but the bottoms and top look the same, so I replaced the top ones. Now I cleaned them up really good, and I cleaned up inside this fuel rail too, because there was almost, varnish looking stuff in there. So what I did is I took a little piece of this 3M scratch pad and cleaned it, wadded it up, sprayed brake cleaner on it, and I tried cleaning it with that, and there was still some residue in there. So I took this really small screwdriver and I gently scraped that junk out of there, because I didn't want a rough surface for the O-ring. Now, I tried to get the fuel injectors. I put those in the engine, and then I was having trouble getting the fuel rail on. So I pulled them apart. I put the injectors into the fuel rail, and I used the little parts cleaner to lubricate the O-rings, got those in. And then I still struggled getting everything lined up and back into place with the fuel injectors. I'm just hoping they're where they belong and they won't leak. Now this one on the driver's side, that was hard to get in there because the fuel rail, let's see if I can get a little light on that so you can see it. The gap right there is super tight, as you can see. So what I ended up doing is taking a flat screwdriver and I pried the fuel injector forward just a hair. Careful not to break it or anything, but then I could get that to snap on there. But that was the only one that didn't want to snap in place. But I got it. So now I need to get the nuts on top of the fuel rail to hold that down. Then I need to get the bolt on the, they call that a banjo bolt. Get that on there, and I've got to get this wiring harness back where it belongs and get those hooked up on these three points on the coil. What else? I'll get that put back together and I'll show you what it looks like. Now there's a bolt that goes right in here that holds this down, so I've got to get that in there too. I don't think that wiring harness will be in the way. Let's make sure I don't have anything left over, because that would not be good. Now when you're putting this wiring harness that goes to the back spark plugs on, there's a little bracket right here it clips into, and then you got to get it underneath this wire so you can get the bolt in there. And then there's a vacuum hose right here that goes underneath this harness, and it clips into this little bracket. And I disconnected that earlier too. So I think other than this bolt, those are all back. I clipped these wiring harnesses onto these coils. Just make sure you push them until you hear a snap, and then they're there. I'm gonna run my battery down here. Trying to keep everything I'm not using out of the way so I don't end up leaving tools underneath here. I'm just about there. I'll get this bolt in, get those nuts on, see if there's anything else I forgot. I clipped this wire back on there. I put this vacuum hose back on there. This vacuum hose back on here. Oop, there's one right there I took off, so I've got to get that on there. This is why I can't wait a week to fix things, because I won't remember all this stuff a week from now. There. Let's see. Well, let me get that all on there and see what it looks like. Well, I think I got it all back together. The hardest part of this whole job so far was getting this bolt back in. This is a rigid piece of metal tubing connected back there, and there's just no give in it. I was trying to pry it forward, and I bent it a little bit so it was twisted, so it wasn't parallel. And I got that straightened back out, but I had a heck of a time getting that bolt in there. So finally I ended up taking a pry bar, which is laying here someplace. What did I do with it? Right here. I ended up taking this pry bar. I tried a screwdriver, that wouldn't work. I put the hook part down in here, got it up against this part, and I was able to force it forward enough. You know, you don't want to bend it and break it, because then you're going to have lots of problems. But I was able, finally, you're trying to pull up on this and forward and get the bolt in. And this is another piece of hose that doesn't want to move, so you just don't have much room. But I got it back together. I'm going to go in and turn the key on and see if I see any fuel leaking anywhere. Hopefully not when it primes the pump. Give me a second. I'll give you guys a peek in here. Here's the fuel injector. I'll get a light on there. I'm not seeing any moisture anywhere at the moment. So I'm going to double check, make sure I have everything hooked up, and then I'm going to start it and make sure I don't have any fuel leaks. Now when you take this cover off, in my case there's a couple of metal spacers here, and they're probably at one time, that's probably what this piece had, a loop on it to hold it in place, but it's gone. So you just kind of got to get them lined up over the hole so the cover can have something to thread into. Maybe I'll get it. Another piece of plastic broke off, so I can get that plastic out of there. That's another piece of the plastic that broke off. Those little metal things stay right there and right there, and that's where the bolts go in. But you know, plastic and heat, it gets brittle. Let me start this up and see if we have any fuel leaking. All right. Oh man, look at that. It's just gushing out of there. Forget that. I guess I did a shitty job. Well, I didn't get something lined up right. Wow, that's just leaking like crazy. And that's the one I had trouble with getting it in lined up. Well, that's all I'm going to do today. Tomorrow's Thanksgiving. I'm going to put my tools away. And I guess you guys know how to do it. Just don't do it like I did it and have problems. Or hire somebody. I don't know what I did wrong. Maybe I need a complete rebuild kit. Maybe I need to figure out how to get the fuel injectors in place properly. I don't know what happened, but that thing's leaking like a sieve. Personally, I didn't think those O-rings were the right ones. They don't look like they're big enough. But that's what happens when you go to O'Reilly's, I guess. Anyway, maybe they are the O-rings for the bottom and not the top. I may have to spend the money and get the whole rebuild kit and completely replace everything on the fuel injector so it works right. It's going to be for another day. Thanks for watching, guys. Sorry I didn't have better results, but at least you know what to do if you want to attempt it. My recommendation would be get the rebuild kit and replace all the plastic pieces and O-rings. That's what I think I'm going to do. It costs like $18 a fuel injector, but that's life. Thanks again for watching.